Hello and welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. My name is Laura Bradburn and I am joined by Colin Watt. How you doing, Colin?
I've been doing better, Laura, I'll not lie. But yeah, good to be here on this Wednesday afternoon.
I was going to say the reason you look like that is because you've obviously got COVID. The reason I look like this is just because this is what I look like. But we'll crack on regardless. You're doing well to be here, and as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I'm aware, you're not the only one in that particular boat. I feel like folk are falling like flies all around me with it. So
It's not just the Celtic first team, it's the Axom team, it's all the podcasts that are dropping down at the minute. But I'm here, I'm going to try and put a Kyogo performance in. Not decided whether it's going to be a cup final or a 20 minutes against St Johnstone performance. We'll see how this one goes.
Oh well, I'm sure folk in the comments will tell us exactly what it's like. But before we get started, I'm quite interested in your T-shirt. We were talking about it before we went on air. So what range is that from exactly?
So this is the new Team Geist range that Adidas have just released. They've released it, I think it's across like 12 or 14 different teams across Europe. And what it is it's a throwback to the range that was out for the 2006 World Cup. So if you go back to the 2006 Celtic famous kits, I think it was the first time we brought back the Bumblebee, and that's what the inspiration is for this. And I've got to say, it is. I mean, I'm feeling old now to think that 2006 is a nostalgia kit, considering I still feel as if it was only 2006 about 5 years ago. But it's good to be there. And if you take the price out of it, then it's a great range. If you're not wanting to spend the pennies after Christmas, then I'd probably give this one a pie. It's a lot dearer than I thought it was going to be, but it's comfy. It's definitely an era of football that I remember very well, and in fact, thinking about it, it's an era I think we're going to discuss in a couple of minutes' time.
It is indeed. It sounds like one of the ones you have to save up your Christmas money from your aunties and uncles and a bit extra.
And the paper round and the milk round and everything else.
Exactly. But when has that not been the case? Still a mug and still buy all of it. So, before we get into, we've got a little bit of a fun, well, I say fun, we'll see how it goes, but we've got a little bit of a plan for today where we're going to do a little bit of a scorecard session and try and rate some of the main squad players for the season that they've had so far. Obviously, some will have good marks, some will have bad marks. We'll just wait and find out. But before we do that, as I'm sure everybody in the chat knows, it's now 14 years since we lost Phil O'Donnell at the untimely age of 35 years old while he was playing for Motherwell. He was captain, he was known as Uncle Phil there, but obviously he's got a strong Celtic connection, having been a young player for us, having signed from Motherwell, left us to went on to Sheffield Wednesday with co-Celtic player Simon Donnelly. But it was a big day that day back in 14 years ago. Before I talk about my memories of it, Colin, what are your memories of that day and the aftermath, and how Scottish football reacted to the news that Phil O'Donnell had, first of all, that he'd taken unwell, and then the later news that he had unfortunately passed away?
Yeah, I remember being at the Celtic game that day. Celtic played Gretna at Celtic Park that day. A 3-0 win for the team. And all the talk before the game was about Bobo Baldé, because he'd only just came back into the side on Boxing Day after being out for about, I think it was about 18 months or so that he hadn't played for Celtic with the whole contract situation that was going on. And he came in, had an absolute blinder in Boxing Day at Tannadice. We kept our first clean sheet away from home for 15 months, I think it was. Kept his place for the game against Gretna. And the performance that day was superb. It was a Gretna side who you were already seeing the sort of beginning of the end of them. Some of the star players were talking about moves in the January window. But Celtic that day played really well. Goals from McDonald. Can't remember who got the second, but the man of the match was Aidan McGeady. And just as he was announced as man of the match, he put one into the top bag via deflection. So it was one of those games, you kind of left the ground. Nobody had really known what had happened over at Fir Park. You just heard that Phil had been taken off injured as such at the time. And I remember walking back to the bus park. For those that remember back then, the bus park, you had to go down the big set of stairs. I hope that's somebody not coming after one of us, Laura.
I know. Somebody out to get us, I think, but that's what you get. I've moved back to Glasgow recently, and that's what you're going to hear. So
it's normally the same here in Greenock, to be fair. If you went to the old bus park, you had to walk down the big set of stairs into the kind of wide open field where the bus park was, and getting back on the bus, you're listening to the Super Scoreboard, and I remember the likes of Hugh Keevins and Derek Johnson, and they're all talking about how it was a serious incident and they didn't really have time to comment on it. And as the show went off air, it was still unknown what had happened. And just as the show went off air, it went to the news, and it was the breaking news story that Phil O'Donnell had sadly passed away. And you could tell there was just a sombre mood across everybody that had been at the game today, that it didn't matter what had happened on the park. It didn't matter Celtic had picked up the 3 points. It didn't matter they were top of the table. We'd lost one of our own, and at such a young age and such a young family, it was just the thoughts went out to everybody that was involved that day. And I know of some fans that went to that game that haven't been back to the football since because of it, and it's completely understandable. A true gentleman, Phil O'Donnell, and a massive loss to the game.
He absolutely is. It's one of those things where I remember when it happened, I was still at university at the time, and it was one of those things that, as time goes by and as time passes on, you start to create a story in your mind of how the events went. But in actual fact, like you say, the events were a lot more confused and a lot less well understood at the time that they were happening. It was back in the day when, Twitter was in its infancy, social media in general was in its infancy, so you weren't in a case where there was people live from the games tweeting you and texting you and all that kind of stuff. It was still a bit early for all that kind of thing, and you just were hearing rumours, and I think naively from my point of view, I heard it was serious, but when you hear it's serious in a football context, you think broken leg or a bad knockout or that kind of thing. And though those are serious, they are serious, like I say, in a football context. They're not life-threatening issues. But when it became clear that it was a life-threatening issue, the whole story took on a different turn. And it was just, I remember the aftermath of it, just the absolute shock. I can't imagine being a Motherwell supporter, to be honest, because from my point of view, I'd heard about players dying on the pitch previously. Mark Vivian Foy was a famous one in 2003. Miklos Feher for Hungary was another famous one. Died on the pitch for Benfica, I think he was playing for. But there's a certain detachment to how you take these stories on and how you remember them and how you think about them, because, for lack of a better word, they are not players that are closely connected to you. With Phil O'Donnell, it was the first player I remember who I remembered as a player passing away, and I think that was the big shock of it. What heartened me was the response of Scottish football. I think it was only right that games were postponed in the aftermath. People forget that at that time there have been people at Celtic Football Club and at other clubs across Scotland and in the UK because of his time down south who would have been close friends with Phil O'Donnell, who would have been, former teammates, current teammates. It would not have been right to carry on in that instance and play those games. So any criticism of that has come since then, I think, is born out of spite and nothing more. And the other sad thing about it is, you hear all these fantastic stories about what a nice guy he was, what a stand-up captain he was, and what an excellent player he was. He was an excellent player. He had a career unfortunately blighted by injury, but he was a fantastic player. It's just sad in these instances, isn't it, that that these people don't get to hear it until it's unfortunately too late.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I know, obviously, you said he was the captain at Motherwell. We had his nephew, David Clarkson, who we were talking about before we came on air. Look, it's always the case, I think, when you see that kind of outpouring of grief. It's like either certain people knew before it had happened how much they were loved, or they don't get the chance to see it. And I think, to an extent, maybe Phil did see it because he was so loved. He was loved by the Motherwell support. He was still loved by the Celtic support. He was loved by his family. but I don't think he could have quite imagined the impact he would have had on the wider game of football.
Absolutely, lots of comments coming in from everybody watching on YouTube, Facebook, everywhere that you're watching. Brian O'Neill says, "Rest in peace, Phil. Hail, hail." I don't know if that's the Brian O'Neill. I think that Brian O'Neill's got one L. Not the real Brian O'Neill, but the Brian O'Neill that played for Celtic was a 1L. So. And lots of other people saying, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said that they think they remember seeing Phil O'Donnell on his debut at Firhill for Celtic as well. So thanks for that comment as well. It's a sad day. I think we'll move on to hopefully a little bit more of a fun conversation, but I think we'll close out this part with saying, we remember players like this and we remember days like this, on the anniversaries and things like that. There's these family and close friends who remember him and miss him every day, and our thoughts are most certainly with them. But thanks everybody for watching, wherever you're watching, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Don't forget to subscribe. We've been providing you content throughout this Christmas holiday period, and we plan to do even more going into 2022, so subscribe and get the notifications on so you don't miss out on that. Colin, we'll move on to this was your idea, right? I'm going to put it out there. A scorecard system. I feel a little bit like David Brent in The Office, where I've got to keep repeating the same 5 options to Keith and say, always the same. But we're going to kind of rate the players as to whether they've had, a good season, a bad season, a middling season, or that kind of thing. So I think the best place to start is we'll start with what is considered to be sort of the main first 11, and we'll start at the back. First and foremost, Joe Hart. I don't know that I really need to ask you this question, but what's your opinion on his season so far?
So we're going to go on a scale of A+ through to F.
Wow.
And everybody get involved in the comment section as well. Let us know what you think. I would say Joe Hart so far this season, considering the sort of backlash that almost came from his appointment, considering the sort of performances that he had down south previously, I think he's proven quite a lot of people wrong. There's still some bits of his game that could be worked on, but he is definitely showing some glimpses of why he was England's number 1 for such a long period of time. Considering the relatively small transfer fee as well, I would have to give Joe Hart an A.
Well, I'm going to outstrip you on that, and here we go. Never did I think I would be saying this, but everybody knows I've been the biggest turncoat in the world on this particular option. I didn't want Joe Hart to come to Celtic. I thought, well, everybody knows what I thought. I'm not going to go into that. He has 100% proved me wrong. And more than that, I think he has been the bedrock on which we've built a lot of our success, because with Barkas in goal last season, it didn't matter how well you were playing up front. It didn't matter how many goals you were scoring. You were always liable to concede. With Joe Hart in goal, I think we almost expect a clean sheet at this stage.
Yep.
And so I've got to go A+ with him. I've got to do it. I think he's... Well, I'll get on to the other players that I think are, up in that level with him. But for me, he's one of the best players at the club at the moment.
I've got to say, the comments are sort of agreeing with us here. Patrick James Simpson, Joe Hart's an A. Robert Arbuckle, he's an A. Daniel F, he's an A-. Conal O'Brien coming in saying a B+. That's an interesting one. Robert Ingram also saying a B. Sean F, B+. Yeah, 8 out of 10s, A+. I think we're kind of... Everybody seems to be on the right path here. I think he's getting a very well-received performance for the first 6 months of the season. And I know what you're saying. Everybody sort of backtracked. We're saying it wasn't an Ange signing. He was just brought in because he was available. But I think he's had a fantastic first couple of months of the season. And when you look at it, there's certain performances where we've picked up the points because of his performances. Even, I think, back to that game away against Livingston where we lost 1-0. If it wasn't for him, it could have been 2 or 3 that day. And even when we're not picking up points, he's still putting in some great performances. And I think I've given him an A because I think there's still a wee bit more to come from him. So I understand your A+. I'll stick with an A so far.
Do you know the one I'm really interested out of those that you read out? The B's and all that I'm fine with, because that's a whole nother grade. The interesting one's Danielle's A-. If she wants to get back in the chat, I want to know what made her go from an A to an A minus. I don't know if it's his haircut or what it is, but we'll find out from her, I'm sure.
Also, is there a difference between A minus and B plus?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know. I wasn't that concerned about I just wanted to pass at school and that was it. So, no, we'll move on. We'll move on to right back, and I think the first one we'll go with is Anthony Rowston. And the reason I want to go with him first is there are people who will grade him based on what they expected and what the outcome was. I think what we should be doing here, and you can tell me if you disagree, is try and grade him on the performance that we think he's had this season. Yeah. With that in mind, I'll go to you and see what your grade is.
Right, so I have to hold my hands up. I absolutely slaughtered Anthony Rowston at the start of the season. I was 100% wrong, and I have actually personally tweeted him asking for an apology. So he's not blocked me, so I'm guessing he's still listening in. His performances have been far better than what anybody could have expected this season. And you're right, there is a difference between how good his performances actually have been and how much we are surprised at how good his performances have been. So I see a lot of people coming in here saying A plus, double A squared, A cubed. I think for me, he's been a B plus this season because there is still some things I'd like him to improve in his game. So I don't know if that falls as an A minus or a B plus. We'll get into that later on. But there is certain things I think he's got to maybe try and work on stopping the crosses from getting over. His crosses over the last couple of weeks from himself has been very, very good. And I think his positioning at times can be worked upon. But I mean, considering if he'd asked us this question last year, we'd have given him a U. Never mind an A to F. He's been definitely the most improved player this season. And if we were given an award out for that, that's exactly what he'd get.
Absolutely. I have to agree. I think I would go with a B plus as well, to be honest, only because although I said what I said about, it's got to be based on his performances, you can't help but have your opinion of what he's done coloured by the complete turnaround. We're talking about a player who couldn't get into the St Johnstone squad last season, and my goodness, he'd be too good for the St Johnstone squad this season based on performances of both. But yeah, he's just been absolutely fantastic, and I think it's like what Tommy Burns used to say about that being a supporter that just got lucky. I think even more than Kieran Tierney for me. Kieran Tierney, right. Before I do this, I want to clarify my comment. I am in no way saying Anthony Rowston is anything like Kieran Tierney, but Kieran Tierney for me wore his heart in his sleeve and was a club supporter and left a legend because of what he achieved and had undoubtedly world-class talent that we're now seeing at Arsenal. Anthony Rowston for me more embodies what Tommy Burns was talking about, the supporter that got lucky, because there are so many people on the stands who see themselves in him. It's almost harder to identify with Kieran Tierney because his talent was so out of this world, whereas Rowston is like one of the ones where he tries his best. Rowston Tierney, oh my goodness, it's better than Tony Ralves, I'll give it that. But he's just epitomises what it is to make the most of your talent, to work hard, to make what you can of the opportunities you're given, and I think he's been absolutely fantastic. With that in mind, we'll move on to his fellow right back, sometimes left back, sometimes right forward, sometimes wherever he fits on the pitch, Josip Youranovich. What have you made of him this season?
I like his composure on the ball. I think there's always this transition period for players when they come from a different league to try and settle into Scottish football. And at first it looked as if Youranovich was just a natural fit. He came in, he was... he came in at left back and he put in an outstanding performance in his first game. He was then sort of shifted between left and right back depending on who was fit, who was injured. I still think there's more to come out of Youranovich. I think the last couple of games have been very impressive. And I'd have to say, in terms of overall performance, I would be probably on a par with Anthony Rowston. I'd say probably a B+.
I'll go with that. I think for me, he's probably a little bit closer to this whole B plus A minus thing. He's maybe a bit closer to an A minus for me, just because of the feeling that he gives me when he's in the team. Of I don't ever doubt him. I don't ever feel nervous that he's there. I think the team is stronger for having him in it. I think the reason it goes down to a B plus in the same grade as you've got is there's just that little bit missing from him that I just think he just needs to get settled in the team a bit more in the position that he normally plays. He's been asked to do all sorts this season because of injuries and things, and I think that's played a part, but he has been fantastic for us. So I agree, I go with a B plus. What are the viewers saying?
A lot of B pluses coming in there. Daniel F coming in to say a few stray passes, but some great penalties. I mean, you can't deny he's definitely our number one penalty taker. On that, do you think he is potentially someone who could take free kicks as well? We've saw a couple so far, but I mean, even with David Turnbull being out injured, and when he has been playing, I don't think we've had that number one set piece taker that can cause teams issues this season. That's something I'd like to see improved in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Did they not come quite close? And was it the cup final? He hit a free kick.
Yeah.
And it was probably about the closest we've come to scoring a free kick all season. So yeah, I think he's definitely up there for that. And he certainly can hit corners as well.
Yeah, definitely. Pat O, Youranovich is the Mr. Nasty we need. You have seen that. Sometimes he's just brought down the player, committed that cynical foul that's needed to be done. A lot of B pluses. Darren Campbell saying A for me, best crosser at the club. It kind of backs up what you were saying there about his set pieces. But yeah, I think this one kind of sums it up. Raymond Eddy saying he's a B plus, room for improvement, but better than Rowston in terms of quality. I think that is the case. I think Rowston has certainly been performing a lot better than what he has expected. If you're doing it purely on effort and determination, Rowston would be an A++ this season. But when you look at it, I think if you're looking at an overall quality of player, Youranovich is probably the better player.
I think that's undoubted. I think what is amazing to me is that we would even be having this discussion and having to clarify that, given the time that Rowston had this time last year. But it's good to know we've got two strong options at right back anyway. With that said, we'll move on to the centre backs, and I think we'll take this initially as a pair, just because I'm conscious of time and wanting to get through the whole team if we can. But Cameron Carter-Vickers and Carol Starfelt. They are probably what you would consider to be the first choice centre backs if all players were fit, if the team was completely working. That's obviously leaving aside Julian, who unfortunately we don't know when he'll be back, but we'll go with CCV and Starfelt. What have you made of them so far this season? I'm imagining their grades might be slightly different.
Yeah, I think I would give Cameron Carter-Vickers I think he gets an A for me.
Agreed.
I think his positioning is absolutely outstanding. You see it at times where he's not got the pace, but he gets himself into the right positions, and tactically he's very astute and he reads the game extremely well. Then we're looking at Carl Starfelt, and this is difficult because I think a lot of people wrote Carl Starfelt off after sort of the first, half dozen to a dozen games. And there is still a lot of improvement that needs to come from Carl Starfelt. However, on his day, he can be very good. There has been performances like the game that Cameron Carter-Vickers had to step out for, the Hearts game at home when we won 1-0. Starfelt got man of the match that day and was outstanding. There's been other performances that he's shown what he can do. I think he does need that calming influence of Cameron Carter-Vickers alongside him to sort of help him out. But overall, I would say Cameron Carter-Vickers I would give an A. Carl Starfelt probably a B-.
See, to be honest, I think that's fair. It's interesting. Cameron Carter-Vickers, I don't think there's any question. He's probably up there with Joe Hart and a couple other players that we'll get to as kind of first names on the team sheet, players who we build the team around and who, never fail to do the job that they're brought in to do. And I think that's vital in any team. Carl Starfelt, I actually feel a bit sorry for him because I think he was starting to find his feet just before he got his injury.
Yeah.
And was certainly, even playing better in that stage than he was after he came back from the injury. So I think he's maybe dealing with a little bit of kind of reluctance to push himself too much after the injury, and maybe lost a little bit of that confidence that he'd built up before. But I think what's clear from what we saw from him before the injury is that he is a player. He can certainly play the game. He can certainly defend. I don't think anybody's been in any doubt of that. And I think he probably just needs to get a consistent run in the team, a little bit like Youranovich. I think he'll come good when he's settled a little bit more, because you're still talking about, a relatively early period of time for somebody who's moved from, a Swedish guy who's moved from Russia to Scotland. I mean, you don't get many more different kind of cultures than that. So I think he'll do fine, but I think the same as you, I think a B or a B minus for me, just so we see a little bit more. The reason I would go B minus is because I wouldn't mark him the same as Youranovich by any stretch. So, but that's an interesting one.
Some good comments coming in here just before.
On you go. What's the comment?
Robert Arbuckle, CCV is as cool as a frozen jubilee. That's the best description I've seen so far. Raymond Eddy coming in, CCV a B plus, but Starfelt a C minus because of a few of his bad performances. That's what I'm saying. I think a lot of people judge him on his sort of early form, but he has certainly improved. Whereas you look at the likes of, I'm trying to see what we've got here. Frank Brennan, Youranovich an A, CCV a B plus, bordering on an A. As for Starfelt, I'm abstaining. It's an interesting one. He does split the Celtic fan base at the minute. And I guess the question, I know you're going to move on to the left back there, but Welsh has probably played almost as many games as Starfelt. Would you give him a higher rating than Starfelt so far this season?
I probably would, only because I think again, the same as Youranovich, the same as Carter Vickers, the same as Hart. I'm never particularly concerned when Welsh is named in the team. I'm never thinking, he's going to be a weak spot. So I would say certainly much room for improvement for him, but I would probably go as far as to say a B plus for Stephen Welsh for what I've seen from him this season.
Yeah, I would be kind of bordering around that sort of B plus. I'd probably go with a B. I think there's still a player to come out of Stephen Welsh. I do think he has a mistake in him as well. Maybe I'm sort of being biased thinking back to the game against West Ham in the pre-season, where I saw the players just running by him for fun, and then you look at it, the game against Livingston, where he sort of came across and cost us that. But there is definitely that sort of I'm trying to think. It's like there's a composure from Stephen Welsh. He isn't someone who looks scared to be there. And considering the performances that he's made to move from being basically the right back at Greenock Morton to being a centre half for Celtic, especially in Europe, and I think he's definitely one. When you look at the youngsters that came through last year, him, Montgomery, and a couple others, he's the one for me that could have the long-term stay at Celtic. Maybe not as the number one or the number two centre half, but definitely someone who you say, do you know what, Cameron Carter-Vickers is out injured. I have no issue in playing Stephen Welsh in that position.
Yeah, I think the jury's still out on some of the younger ones who broke through. Montgomery especially, he's been around the first team and he's been good in spells, but certainly hasn't nailed down any kind of a position, whereas Welsh is now seen as a kind of viable alternative option for the manager, which is, speaks volumes of his ability and his work rate as well. So yeah, I think he's done well. I think he's got a long career ahead at the club. And I'm looking forward to seeing it because I think he's been great. Looking at left backs.
How long have we got?
I mean, I'm actually sitting here thinking, who do I even talk about here? Because you could talk about Scales, you could talk about Taylor. Youranovich we've already gone over, but he's made a few appearances at left back. We'll start with Greg Taylor. Obviously, that shoulder injury, I think it was back in September maybe that he went out with a shoulder injury. Injuries aside, what kind of performances do you think he's put in under Ange?
I don't feel as if I've seen enough of Greg Taylor, and some people will say that's a good thing. Some people will say that's a bad thing. I think before Greg Taylor picked his injury up, he was starting to understand the inverted fullback situation.
Yeah.
And when I look at it, I'm just thinking it's very difficult to grade him over a certain level because there's only been so many games that he's played this season. And I feel as if you've not seen anything to suggest that he's above average or below average this year. So I'm just going to go smack bang in the middle. I'm going to give him a C. And I'll be interested to see what the second half of the season has for him.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think C is like an average grade, and that's all you can really give him. It's like, he's not been bad. We've not seen enough of him to class him as being good. So it's a short conversation as far as he's concerned. But that's all you can really say about him. Is there anything in the comments from anybody about Taylor?
Craigie White comes in to say Greg Taylor's not Celtic classic. It's a C for an effort, and he's an honest player. I'd kind of argue against him being Celtic class. He's shown at times that he can be the best left back at the club, but could we get better in? That's probably the question that comes in there. In terms of Greg Taylor, Kookaburra comes in to say he would get a B. Ian Boy Martin C+. All round about where we'd say that he would be. Robert Arbuckle with an interesting point though. Taylor a B+ looks better under Ange than what he did under Neil Lennon. I think that could be said for a lot of players this season.
I think you could reel off a screed of players for whom that's the case, and it's not really surprising. With that said, we'll move on to Liam Scales. Perhaps a bit unfair to include him in this again because we've not seen an awful lot of him. I've liked what I have seen, and to take the pressure off you a little bit, I'm going to put my grade out there first. I'm going to say, based on the fact that we've probably seen as much of him as we have of Taylor, but I've liked what Scales has done better, I'm going to go C+ for him. So slightly above, just because I think he's potentially a better footballer all round. I don't know about defender, but I think he's certainly... for a player that I thought Ange hadn't signed or hadn't selected, he certainly seems to fit his style of play.
Definitely, and it gets to the point where I've got to start asking producer Paul if he can stop getting Laura to copy my homework, because that's exactly what I'd put down as well, is a C+. Look, the reason I think he's the better fit out of the two at left back is because when I've saw Scales play, he is very, very comfortable in that sort of inverted fullback position coming into the middle of the park, and every time he gets the ball he's always thinking 2 passes ahead. He's thinking where the pass is going to be and can he get back onto the end of it, and you saw that with his goal at Tannadice and his performances when he's came in so far. You see obviously he's had that time of being a centre half, and it sort of suits him to play the inverted fullback role. Again, someone who's only 23, he's got a bit to go with him. Overall, if I had to pick one of them to start in the next game, I would probably go William Scales at the minute.
I think I would probably I'd probably go with that as well. I think he's surprised a lot of people, myself included. I wasn't sure what to expect of him. I didn't really know an awful lot about him, as I'm sure a lot of people didn't. But from friends who watch League of Ireland and from friends who watch a lot of that part of the world's football, they were convinced we were signing a player, and I think it's slowly proven to be the case. But it's an interesting one. It's just a strange one with the left backs, but because we haven't had a nailed on left back, but it's strange because I think he could be great, but it's just it's just about getting a consistent run in the team again. I sound like a broken record, but that's it.
But that's the thing with Celtic this season. The amount of players that you're going to struggle to give a rating for because we haven't seen enough of them because of the injury concerns. I mean, you take a look at the game the other day, there was 18 players as part of our first team squad that were unavailable through COVID, through injury, through other things like that. So that's 18 players realistically that it's very difficult to rate. Guys like James Mccarthy, who we'll get on to at the minute, he's only played about a dozen games, and I'd say in terms of his performances has been okay, but it's very difficult to rate him because it's not as if he's played 12, 90 minutes. It's maybe been 1,000 minutes over those 12 games, or not even 1,000 minutes, 500 minutes over those 12 games. It's kind of difficult.
Yeah, it's a strange one. With James McCarthy in mind, I think we're going to move on to him just now because, well, for want of a better phrase, I don't want to spend too much time talking about McCarthy's performances for fear of being too harsh on him, But I'll let you go first with him. What is your... first of all, I'd like to know what your thoughts were when we signed him. Did you think he was a worthwhile signing, and has he gone on to prove to be the case for you?
I thought he was a good squad player to have in the team, especially if you could get him fit, and I think that's still been the case. I don't think we've seen the full potential of what McCarthy can offer to the team because he has been he's been injured at times, he's been out of the team for one reason or another, but some of the performances when he comes into the team, he can play that sort of pass that the only other player in the team that I've saw been able to do that so far is Tom Rogic. You look at some of the assists that he's put in already this season, and I'm thinking that's outstanding. But does he do enough of it? I've not seen it yet from him. And I just it's the 4-year contract for me. Knowing how much that he's had his injury issues before, the fact that even when he hasn't been injured, he hasn't really got into the team down at Palace, and now coming up here, it was almost a sort of hush-hush about his fitness level. When he came up, you were asking Ange, and he was saying, oh, he'll be in and around, or he's fit, and then still wouldn't make the bench. It's difficult. McCarthy, I'm going to give him a C-.
I'm going to be honest.
It was verging on a D.
Well, I was going to say I think you're being generous there because the only thing saving me from giving him an F is the couple of assists that he's made that are passes that, like you say, couldn't be done without a player of his quality on the ball. So with that in mind, I've got to go D-. Like I think I was shocked when we signed him because I felt a little bit like I didn't even particularly like what he said in the press conference when he said about the move being on the cards for years and this, that and the next thing. And I kind of thought to myself, well, why are you making the move now? The only reason can be is because it suits you now, perhaps because you're not in anybody's plans down south or that kind of thing. I think he's proved since he's come up why he's not in anybody's plans in the Premier League. He looks so off the pace, it's unreal. His fitness issues are a problem. I know he had COVID earlier in the season, but plenty of players did. And the 4-year contract, like you say, just absolutely baffles me. I think that's like throwing money out the window, to be honest, for a guy who's 30 years old already. And even a 2-year contract, you could have said, well, give him a season to bed in and a season to do something of worth for us. But a 4-year contract, I mean, if this is James McCarthy at 30 years old, I don't know what he's going to be like ending 32 or 33 years old. Like I can't imagine him. Basically, I think his returns will diminish throughout the course of his contract, and that's what concerns me. But maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh and a little bit too crabby.
I'm not sure because, as you said, we've not seen a lot of him. I know he came in without a pre-season because he was sort of let go from Palace, kind of thrown in at the deep end, picked up injuries, picked up COVID, as you said. Now he's got this 3-week window with the teams being off. They're not going away. They're not going to Dubai like they did last year. They're staying in Scotland. They're going to take sort of 2-3 weeks under Ange to actually not have to prepare for the next game, to actually work on the kind of style of football that Ange wants to play and to get people up to speed. So if he's available, I think this 3-week break will help him massively. If he doesn't play from now to June, sort of 15-20 games, and you don't see much out of him, I think he is someone, as you say, it's just going to be a case of that was just a complete wasted signing. But this is a big chance for him, and you'd like to think that, considering how much the club means to him, he'll get the best out of him for the second half of the season. It's
an interesting one. I'm just scrolling the comments as you're talking there, and there do seem to be people who still have faith in him. Conal O'Brien says he thinks he'll be better next season. well, I'm not going to read that name out actually because I just realised what it was. But it says McCarthy is a C, will hopefully do better. Yeah, it's a strange one. Our very own Lawrence Connolly says 4-year contract is based on him being a free signing. It may well be, but I don't know that that's a financially good way to work, that just because you don't have to spend the money on the transfer fee, you plough it all into the player's pocket. But I think before I get myself in any bother, we'll move on from James McCarthy. To flip the tables completely, Conor McGregor, I nearly said Callum McGregor. Conor McGregor, I don't know what kind of a performance he would put in for Celtic, but Callum McGregor, I mean, do we even need to talk about what grade he's going to get? What do you think?
No, the one thing I will say is, though, as much as we talk about people eating their words when it comes to Anthony Rowston last season, I think a lot of people are eating humble pie when it comes to Callum McGregor as well. I think he was one who was getting a lot of stick, and I don't actually blame people for it because we were a poor side last season. However, we were all watching the games from home, and you don't understand the role that Callum McGregor plays in that Celtic team until you watch him in the flesh, because he's one who is very few that's out there that picks the ball up, plays the ball, and then is always looking for the ball again. He's the one that's looking to build the play and piece it all together. And when you don't see that on the TV, you're thinking, where is he? He's not making these moves. He's not the Callum McGregor of 3-4 years ago who would be on the edge of the box trying to stick one in the back of the net like he did against Rangers at Hampden. He's the one who is the absolute dictator in that midfield. And when you're watching the games now, you're going, that is what he brings to the team. You see it when he's not in the team because there's no one else there that can do that. That all being said, A+, even plus. He's the star man for Celtic in that midfield. So yeah, A+.
I would 100% agree. I was having a conversation with my brother the other night where we kind of came to the conclusion that we actually think Callum McGregor might be the player without whom our style changes the most. I think he's the it's an overused phrase, but he really is the engine of the team, and that's whether he's playing further forward or further back or pure central midfield. He really is the player without whom we lack an awful lot of drive. Obviously we did fine the other night without him. I think that was more down to the poor quality of the opposition than it was to do with his absence.
Yep.
But, the other thing to say is the humble pie that people are eating, I don't think is just down to his playing style and the importance of his playing. I think there's a lot of people thought he wasn't captain material. Didn't because he doesn't have the personality of Scott Brown or the boisterousness of Scott Brown, certainly not to the outside world anyway. I don't know what he's like in a dressing room. But the minute that I saw him do that on the field team talk after we had a great win, I can't remember what game it is. Your memory's a bit better.
Yeah, earlier in the season, I think it was the Dundee game. Yeah,
Dundee game, and we hammered them 6-0, and he kind of was like, this is what it's about, this is what we've to do. You really thought, no, we've got a captain in our hands here. Might not do things the same way as the previous captain, but it doesn't mean it's any less effective. So I'm going to go A++ for him. He's absolutely fantastic. I love him, as does one of my nieces. I probably shouldn't say that in public. She's put it this way. He's this generation's Simon Donnelly for my niece. I think is probably what it is.
Do you know? We were speaking about this on the State of Scottish Football because we had a team of the season over there, and you could only pick 3 players from each team to make it fair. And out of the 14 contributors, all 14 picked Callum McGregor. And I think that the fact that not only Celtic fans, but teams from all over Scotland are appreciating how much he brings to not only the Scottish national team, but to the Celtic team as well. There's very few players that can be so polarising like that. And I think Callum McGregor's definitely one who stepped up into this role. And for me, I'm hoping now that with his extended contract, he's a Celtic player for life.
I really wouldn't surprise me if he will be, because I think, especially around the Brendan Rodgers era, if he was going to leave, he would have done around that time. He was so good. But hopefully we can hold on to him, and he can really, it's a rarity to have a one-man, for a player to be a one-man, or a one-club man, I should say. But hopefully he is. Moving on to other midfielders, Nir Bitton, who we can officially call a midfielder again, I think. A pleasant surprise this season for me, I would say, Champions League qualifier aside.
Yeah, I think Bitton's finally getting the chance to show what he can do in the position that he should have been playing for a number of years now. It's great he's got that versatility, that he can step in at centre-back, but it doesn't suit his style of football. It doesn't suit his game. He's not the most physical player. What he is good is he's good with the ball at his feet. Sometimes people will say that he does slow the game down, and I can see that, especially when you compare him to maybe Callum McGregor in the middle of the park. McGregor's very quick with his feet. He's very quick to get the ball up and going. But what I can say about Bitton is he's certainly someone whose confidence has grown over the last number of weeks and months. You take a look at the run that he had the other day against was it Ross County, where he basically carried the ball 40, 50 yards. And cup final as well. And he's captained the side a couple of times as well to show how much he is an important squad player to Ange Postecoglou. And I love his demeanour afterwards. He's like, it's 2-2. This is an easy job. Callum isn't getting the armband back. He's very good at just sort of being that elder statesman in the squad. It is quite interesting to think he's coming up for 10 years as a Celtic player very soon. A number of people would have probably written him off a season or two ago, but now if he keeps this form up, then he'll probably have earned his testimonial when it comes round. In terms of performances this season, I would give him a B+.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be slightly less generous there. I would probably go a B with him, but I do agree with everything that you said. I think he's certainly come into his own since he's come back into his favoured position. I think he, his shortcomings in his game were far too easily exposed in defence, but so would a lot of players be if they were asked to play there when it wasn't their natural position. And we did get a bit of criticism from other podcasts, from other commenters and things like that, keeping on talking about the fact he was playing out of position, because the opinion of some was that if you play somebody often enough in a certain position, it naturally becomes their position. I really don't think that that's the case. You're talking about a guy who went from training his entire career to play in the central midfield role. That was how he was coached. That was how he made it as a footballer. That was how he made it as a professional footballer. That's how he earned his move to Celtic. So to then turn around and say, well, he's now a defender because we've played him for a season and a bit in defence is, not a valid argument for me. But yeah, I would go with a B for him. I think he's been great. The next one to move on to as far as midfield's concerned, David Turnbull. I didn't really want to talk about him, to be honest, because, I do have a very positive opinion of him. It's not been a fantastic season for him, and so I'll take the hit on this one and give my grade first. I'm going to say probably a B-, just because too many games he posts missing. When he's good, he's really, really good, but too many games he's just kind of out of it and not really part of the process. And that might be the style of play, it might be the opposition we're playing, but I think he needs to be more impactful on a more consistent basis.
There was something that kind of came to me the other week when I was thinking about David Turnbull, and about this time last year we were sitting going, he can't last any more than 60 minutes. He's always getting hooked off after 60 minutes. And now you're seeing David Turnbull has had to play 90 minutes week in, week out, because we've been so short in that midfield. There's been no one else that we can turn to, and he's picked up the injury because of it. He's going to be out now for a couple of months. That might not necessarily be the worst thing for him, because I think everybody would have said he needed a bit of time out. I mean, as you said, at times he can play very well. Pardon me, sorry. When I look at it, the game against Dundee United at Tannadice is one of those ones that you're thinking, this is the best and worst of David Turnbull. The worst being the absolute sitter that he missed when the ball got put across. The best being his exquisite sort of lob over the goalkeeper and tap in at the back post. I still think Turnbull can go missing in some of our bigger games. And there is still a lot to come from him. I think this rest's going to do him the world of good. I do think this time out will do him the world of good. You've given him a B minus. I'll be slightly more generous, considering his goals and his assists so far this season. I'll give him a B.
There's a lot of people agreeing with you in the chat. D Boyle says he's a B and has given us a grade on Tom Rogates, who we'll move on to next. Kieran 1888 says Turnbull gets a B. He's the potential, but needs to apply himself more often. So lots of people around that B minus, but more settling on B for Turnbull, I think, which is great to see, because I think he did go often underappreciated at times, and I think people are appreciating what he's doing, but he needs to give a little bit more. Moving on to the big Aussie in the middle of the park, Tom Rogates, who not only appears to be enjoying his football an awful lot, having a laugh here and there with everybody. I don't think it's too hyperbolic to say he's having his best season in a Celtic shirt so far as an individual. He might have had more successful seasons in terms of silverware. He might have played more games. He might have done a lot of things. But I think as an individual, and certainly he's sort of, like his stock among Celtic supporters is higher than it's been ever, really. What do you make of that?
He's so influential in this team that when he's not playing, then you notice the big difference. Even when I look back at the performance up at Dingwall, he was on the park for 15 minutes and it turned the game around. Mm-hmm. He was the one that set up the winning goal. He's been capable of doing that for a number of months now at Celtic. He was someone who knew the assignment when Ange Postecoglou was linked with the club. He knew what he had to do to be part of it. There's an interesting point here from Daniel Duffy, which isn't quite true. Roderick's not out of contract this summer. He's out of contract next summer. And for me, I said this on the podcast last week, on my Santa list is to get Tom Roderick a new contract, because I would give him another couple of years at Celtic. He's the one that Ange Postecoglou turns to, and he's not had the best season in terms of goals and assists, but he has had that magic, and you've seen it in spells. And considering the sort of couple of seasons that we saw from Tom Roderick beforehand, where he was someone who couldn't last 60 minutes. He's now lasting the 90. He's now putting it in there. I think you'll see an even better Tom Roderick in the second half of this season. So in terms of that, I'll give him an A, and I think by the end of this season, he could be an A+.
I'll give him an A as well, but I think that's subject to review. If he puts in good work, he'll get an even better grade at the end of the season for certain. We'll move on to the main front three. I think everybody is in agreement that the main front three that we would be talking about at this point in time would be Jota, Kyogo and Abada. Jota first. Obviously, an injury of which we don't know the severity quite yet. I'm hearing things that suggest it's maybe a little bit more serious than it was first appeared to be, which would be a shame if that was the case, because I think, even as a loan player, people were talking about wanting to see him have a future at the club. I would give him an A straight away, because I think he does two things. He gets people off their seats in an exciting way, in a kind of Di Canio type way, but he's also got that end product, his game. Too often you get players who, were very exciting, very skillful players for Celtic, who never really got to the point where their end product was of any great consequence. I think with Jota, he proves that he makes the team better when he's in it. He scores goals. He creates, more often than not, he's mostly an assist man, but certainly does both. And I just think he's one of those players that he's Celtic at heart in terms of his style of play, isn't he? He's just so entertaining. Yeah,
when you talk about the Celtic way, that's what Jota brings. He's the first person since Paddy Roberts who's actually got people up off their seats anytime he gets on the ball, because you just don't know what's going to happen next. Mm-hmm. Jota gets a G for me for George Michael, because he's been the best at impersonating him all season. But no, in terms of being on the park, he is. At first, I I wasn't sure whether he was best positioned on the right side or the left side. On the left side, I feel as if he's always cutting in, but he's very similar to Scott Sinclair in that instance, where you know what he's going to do, but the defenders just don't know how to cope with him. And when he's played on the right-hand side, which should be his natural side, he's looked just every bit as comfortable. So there hasn't been any sort of period where Jota's played where I'm going, do you know what, he's just been average. He's always been good or very good. Well, I think Jim Orr's always spoke about this. You want a Celtic player to be a 7 out of 10 every week. And I don't think any of Jota's performances have ever dropped under a 7. And for that, I think you've got to give him an A+ so far this season.
Absolutely. I think I totally agree with that. Running short on time, we might not even get to the strapline, which we were going to talk about Dubai and Age of Ange and all sorts of stuff, but I've been having too much fun doing this particular conversation. Before we move on to the main man, Kyogo, we'll go with Abada because I don't want to end on too negative a note. Came into the club, it looked really exciting, scored a hatful of goals, has possibly lost a bit of self-confidence along the way. I don't know if it's because he's been dropped out of the team or that loss of confidence has made him be dropped out of the team. It's kind of a chicken and an egg situation. For me, I would say, if you'd asked me at the start of the season, I'd have said a B+. At this point in time, I would probably say probably a B-, verging on a C even at this point. I just think he's dropped away massively and spends far too much of his game not impacting the game. Certainly the last couple of weeks where he's had to play a bit more through the middle, he's had more of an impact, but I'm judging him based on his performances out wide right, where he's been at the most, selected the most. What's your opinion on Abada? I take it from your reaction you're a little bit surprised by that grading.
I'll get to that in a second. David Canavan comes in here saying, can we do this again at the end of the season? It's been a great podcast. We will definitely do this at the end of the season because I've got them all written down and we'll see how far wrong we were. I think in terms of Abada, when he's moved back into that central role, and we just spoke about Jim Orr there, he's always said that Abada's best position he thought was through the middle. And with Kyogo being out injured, he's the only one who gives that sort of energy, who will chase the ball down. But for me, he's also someone who's a confidence player. That if he hasn't got into a game within the first 20 minutes, I don't see him getting into a game at all. And you look at his stats this season, as you say, they started so well between him, Kyogo and Jota. The front three were on fire. I think between the three of them, they've scored or assisted 55 goals this season already, which is incredible. He's only 20 years old. He's still adapting to the pace of Scottish football. I think he's someone who needs to learn that even if things aren't going right for him, as long as he keeps putting in the performance, something will come at the end of the day. I think after 20 minutes, if he doesn't start, he drops off and you don't see him in the game at all, which is a shame because he does have a lot of talent and I'm sure Ange will work very hard with him to get the most out of him. I was kind of verging on a B- to a C until his last couple of games, with the St Mirren one probably aside, where I thought he was just very unfortunate not to score. I'll probably put him back into the B range. I'll give him a B for so far this season.
That's fair. I think that's fair. I think, the last couple of games, especially those couple of goals that he scored, he certainly. I think he probably is just a confidence player, like you say, and a young player who just needs a little bit more time. So perhaps, my grade at the end of the season will jump up massively, but we will wait and see. That'll be an interesting one. And obviously, to finish off the show today, Kyogo, not a better note to finish on, really. Kyogo, what's his arrival meant to you as a Celtic supporter?
What I've enjoyed very much about Kyogo is how much he was written off before he even kicked a ball for Celtic. And I'm not talking about from Celtic fans, I'm talking about from pundits, from fans of from other teams all over Scotland. He was brought over as this 5'10", 9 stone Japanese international who was going to do nothing, and he's proved everybody wrong. Kyogo, where would we be without him? That is a very good comment coming in there from Chancer. He has been absolutely outstanding. And what you've seen is it's not just the tap-ins, because that's where he got his goals at the start of the season, where he was getting on the end of the right crosses coming in from the left and the right. He's now showing his quality. His goal away at Dundee, where that move by him and Jota was outstanding. And then the ball, the kind of goals that he scored in the cup final as well, that quality I've not seen from a Celtic forward probably since Larsson. And I hate comparing him to Larsson because he'll not be the same sort of player, but he does have that incredible ability. And the fact that we managed to pick him up is outstanding, and well done to the coaching staff and to the scouting team for picking him up. I'd like to think that when the new Japanese players come in, we'll see an even better Kyogo because he'll have had that time out. I think in total this season he scored best part of 40 goals for both teams.
Mm-hmm.
If he can keep that up for the next couple of seasons, what a signing we'll have on our hands. He is the star man. He gets the A++.
I would have to agree. I think A++ for Kyogo. The one slight criticism I would have of him is I think he could have more goals this season. I think he could have scored more chances. But having said that, the old cliche goes, you only miss chances if you're in the position to have them in the first place, and I think that's been the biggest strength of his game. The Larsson comparison is one I've made, one you've made, one everybody's made, and the thing that is, although that sounds a bit ridiculous on the face of it, especially given that Larsson was here for 7 years and scored the amount of goals that he did, the very fact that people are even mentioning his name in combination just shows you the quality that Kyogo's got. Celtic supporters, I've always said, are not stupid when it comes to recognising the quality of a player. We notice the difference between a player who's good enough for us and good enough for Scotland and good enough for what we want. But we also recognise a Van Dijk, a Tierney, a Wanyama, a Kyogo is now in that category. Somebody who we feel lucky to have. And to for whatever. Oh, thank you very much, Chancellor. A+ for Axum. Fantastic. I don't know if that applies to either of the people on the screen or just the team in general, but we'll take it anyway. But no, Kyogo is just class, a class apart. He makes the team better. I would encourage anybody, if you can get to a game, if you're in a position to be able to get to a game. And I'm not somebody that's able to go to games all the time, but I've been fortunate enough to see Kyogo a couple of times. It makes you appreciate what he does all the more. And I'm not an advocate of saying, oh, you have to be at the games and blah, blah, blah. But really, if you're there live, you can do your own version of player cam with your eyes and just watch Kyogo for 10 minutes. Look at the runs he makes. Look at the way he's thinking about the game. I would actually say that he's brought the level of a lot of other players in the team up because he's made runs and things like that they maybe wouldn't even have thought to make the pass for. But because he's now making the runs, they're recognising it and making those passes. Absolutely, no exaggeration to say he's world class and a testament to Ange's judgment of a player. I will never again criticise any player that I know Ange has selected for coming in because I know he knows how to spot them.
Yeah, definitely. And if you had to give Ange a rating as well, it would definitely be an A so far. One trophy in the bag. Obviously, not quite where you want to be in the league. Made a few mistakes here and there, bit to improve on, but certainly been a breath of fresh air since he's took over the club. Absolutely.
A cubed, A squared cubed, whatever you want to call it. He's just been... It's been a bumpy road with him, but I've adored him from the minute he set foot in the club and the way he's spoken. It's not even just about the football performances or the on-the-pitch performances. It's about the way he conducts himself. So Absolutely. Often we've not had managers who conduct themselves in that manner, and it's really been fantastic to see. But yeah, absolutely unreal. Thank you everybody for watching today. I think this has been a fun one. I think we got a bit carried away time-wise with it, but it was just because we were enjoying ourselves that much. Thank you very much, Colin, for being a trooper and getting through today. I imagine you'll be back in your scratcher not long after this one.
I'm contemplating that right away. Yep.
So thank you everybody for watching. Thanks for all your comments. Thanks especially for that one. We will do this again at the end of the season because I think it's been worthwhile and it'll be interesting to see what our changes of opinion are. We'll see you again tomorrow for yet another bulletin. You can always count on us for that. And until then, thank you, Colin. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you soon.
Take care.